What does it mean to hope? On May 9, 2024, Pope Francis delivered a papal bull, which ushered in the 2025 Jubilee year. Echoing the words of St. Paul in the Book of Romans, the Pope declared that hope does not disappoint, and that those who participate in the 2025 Jubilee are not just pilgrims, but pilgrims of hope. Though there are a variety of ways for Catholics to participate in the Jubilee, one of the most popular is by traveling to one of the 4 major papal basilicas in Rome and crossing through the basilica's holy door, which are only opened during the Jubilee year. That's why this year I decided to travel to Rome on pilgrimage to each of the 4 major basilicas: St. Mary Major, St. John Lateran, St. Paul's outside the walls, and of course, St. Peter's. The Catholic tradition of Jubilee, started in 1300 by Pope Boniface VIII, derives from an ancient Jewish celebration documented in the Book of Leviticus. Every 50 years, according to Mosaic law, the high priest would initiate a 12-month Sabbath by sounding a yobel, a ram's horn, signifying that this year was designated for rest, repaying debts, and other ways of reconciling with God and one another. Though church jubilees occur more frequently, every 25 years, unless an exception is made by the Pope, reconciliation with God and total renewal from sin is an essential theme in Catholic Jubilee as well. The tradition of crossing through the holy doors is one way to receive a plenary indulgence, a special grace by which, after filling the requirements of receiving the sacraments and praying for the Pope's intentions, within 20 days of crossing through the door, Catholics are completely freed from any time spent in purgatory after death. Though the indulgence can only be obtained by Catholics, the Church welcomes anyone regardless of faith to cross through the doors. However, this means that the doors have become somewhat of a novel touristic experience more than just a pilgrimage, and crowds of pilgrims and tourists alike are inevitable at every basilica. So, to avoid crowds during my first visit to St. Mary Major, I set out at 7 a.m., the church's opening time, and after a brief walk in security, I arrived at the holy door, hoping that my life would be forever changed in just a few steps. But when I finally crossed the threshold, welcomed into the dazzling golden nave by the symmetrical bronze reliefs of Christ and Mary, outstretching their pierced hands to entering pilgrims, I found no immediate or miraculous rush of spiritual consolation. I had traveled all this way to Rome, but I felt like I was still waiting for something greater. This was one of the first lessons I learned about hope from the Jubilee, that hope doesn't mean feeling satisfied. It means having joy throughout life because we as Christians know that something greater awaits us. Hope itself is the sustenance, or the endurance, to continue working forward through life, seeking the brighter horizon of heaven. I would go on to visit this basilica 3 more times while in Rome. I could easily understand why it was Pope Francis's favorite. Of the 4 papal basilicas, the Santa Maria Maggiore holds the greatest presence and intimacy, as if to call pilgrims back like a mother calling her child home. Perhaps this was an effect of my favorite altarpiece in the basilica, the Salus Populi Romani, one of the oldest known images of Christ and Mary, rumored to have been painted by St. Luke before being brought to Rome by St. Helena, the mother of Constantine. The Pauline Chapel, commissioned by Pope Paul V in the early 1600s, was designed around this ancient icon. The immense amount of blue lapis imitates the color of Mary's cloak, making any viewer feel as though they are being swaddled while in the chapel. The blue also evokes an allusion to heaven or the sky, making the icon's gaze feel even more powerful, penetrating, and somehow personal. I traveled here on July 4th, which is funny for an American pilgrim, especially because 2025 marks the election of the first ever American Pope. I had hopes of seeing Pope Leo that day, but all regularly scheduled papal audiences had been canceled in preparation for his travels to Castel Gandolfo. But even without the Pope there, the site of St. Peter's radiates the truly overwhelming power of the church. Bernini's iconic yet expansive piazza, designed in 1667, and Maderno's intricate Baroque facade, which enthrones the tallest dome in the world, only foreshadowed the infinite treasures found inside. The Holy Door was like a portal into another world. Here, hope is immersive. If such beauty could exist on earth, then truly heaven will be beyond our imaginations. Tradition holds that St. Peter's marks the site of the first pope's crucifixion and burial, as you can still visit the tomb of St. Peter today, either before the main altar or beneath the basilica in the Vatican grottos. What many don't realize is Peter's martyrdom occurred just days after he met with St. Paul one final time, and Paul began traveling in the opposite direction, only to meet his own martyrdom. The site of St. Paul's tomb, the Basilica of St. Paul's outside the walls, the Aurelian walls of Rome that is, lies just 4 miles from the Vatican, so it was only natural that I would visit it on the same day. St. Paul's, the second largest basilica in Rome, if counting St. Peter's, hides behind a set of deceivingly bland exterior walls, though its magnificence from outside its 19th century portico, a dizzying array of over 150 columns, is anything but self-contained. Much of the larger-than-life decoration, such as Obici's massive, immovable central statue of Paul in the atrium, or Mariani's and Manfrini's elaborate bronze door reliefs, are fairly contemporary, crafted in the 19th or 20th centuries as a result of the 1823 fire that destroyed part of the original 5th century basilica. The holy doors were sculpted in 2000, one of the latest additions to the space, save the gallery of papal medallions inside. However, even before that, the basilica's story has been one of renovation. The original chapel, marking St. Paul's grave, was torn down in 324 by Constantine to build a church, and roughly 50 years later, the Pope replaced that site with the basilica of today's scale. To me, the constant and evident need for renovation and the contemporary nature of the basilica echoes a sort of hope to pilgrims. That hope isn't a relic of the past. Saints and holiness can be built up at any time, even in our own century. And if God could transform St. Paul from a murderer to a martyr, then there is hope that he could work through us in our own time, no matter how imperfect or ordinary we may feel. I visited the Basilica of St. John Lateran last in my pilgrimage. I attended the earliest Sunday morning Mass and passed through the holy doors with an unfamiliar sense of accomplishment, of being newly refreshed, of peace. The basilica in the early morning was so empty and restful, bracing for the tourism of the later day. From any vantage point of the white marble nave, the architectural focal point remained the unique golden Byzantine-style mosaic created in the 5th century and refurbished in the 13th, which features a symmetrical pair of stags, an allusion to Psalm 42. The mosaic creates an Edenic motif, as though the saints it features reside within the new Eden, recreated by the water of baptism. By no coincidence, baptism itself is a major theme of the basilica's art in commemoration of Constantine's baptism in 337. The Lateran was the first baptistry and the architectural model for others in the ancient world. The sort of hope I discovered when entering the Lateran was similar to baptismal renewal. I felt as though peace had been breathed into me. What I didn't realize when I had begun my pilgrimage is that hope doesn't entertain an inordinate anxiety about the future or the consequences of the present. When we look forward, longing for God like deer, hope assures us that peace will be found in our waiting, and the anxieties of our minds can be easily washed away by the Creator's love. Like all journeys, my pilgrimage in Rome naturally came to an end, though my greatest hope is that its eventual destination will be eternal. Every day, to reflect on my pilgrimage, I tried to ask God this question: what do you want from your pilgrim? The answer now seems to ring abundantly clear, echoing in the homily that I heard during the Mass I attended at the Vatican. Segui me, follow me. I found God asking me for nothing more but to simply look at Him and to keep going, knowing that if we continue to walk through life with our eyes fixed on His love, no matter where we are, we can shape our lives into a pilgrimage of hope.